Wel, ek wou by jou hoor, wil jy nie miskien die video's share nie? Kos van myne gaan fucked up raak.
Well, away, y'all. Email hulle gou vir my. Anyway, hello everyone. Welcome to our stream.
Hello. Share.
Today we're covering animals and religion.
Yeah, well, the possibility of us evolving to be religious.
Yeah, a few topics.
Okay, and so the first video, which one do you want to watch first, Cam? The longer one or the short one?
Let's do the shorter one first. I think it's a better introduction.
Okay.
Oh, hey, Pro SM in the chat joining us. How's it going? Thanks for tuning in. Nice. Yeah. So send me that link.
Cam has.
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay.
Let's see.
Did you get it?
Yeah, there we go.
Cool.
Okay,
cool.
so...
And I'm going to send the other one separately.
Okay, cool.
All right. Sorry, who's in the stream?
It's Stephen. Yeah, it's Stephen.
Religion.
Oh, hey.
An idea that has defined human culture for thousands of years.
Okay. So let's get this. Launch your screen. Here we go. Okay, so let's take a look.
Religion. An idea that has defined human culture for thousands of years.
I just thought let me... Yeah, okay, cool. And then I'm going to I think, mute yourself as well.
Oh, yeah. Okay, cool.
Religion. An idea that has defined human culture for thousands of years. Religion has been used in all manners, from brutal conflicts to times of great prosperity. An idea about how the world works, why it works, and why we're here. Regardless if you are religious or not, it is undeniable of its importance to our species. In modern times, over 80% of people are religious. There are over 4,200 religions worldwide, and likely thousands more in prehistory. We have seen the formation of religions in real time, though they're often called cults. This video is not meant to advocate for atheism, but it will talk about the origins of religion and its importance to the human species. There was a time before religion, when our ape ancestors did not have the capacity to think abstractly. But these men are long gone. We cannot study religion through 2-million-year-old fossils, and even labeling Stone Age finds as religious is controversial. Fortunately, we are not the only animal on Earth. Through our closest relatives, we may be able to get a glimpse into our own minds. Biologists working in the Republic of Guinea found evidence of what seemed to be a sacred tree used by chimps, perhaps for some sort of ritual. Camera traps were set up on trees with unusual...
Let's just take a look at this picture. Let's just examine it a little bit. You're still muted, in case you're trying to talk.
So, yeah, the first time I saw this, I was actually quite struck by it because it's you really don't expect this type of behavior from other animals, and when you actually see videos of this happening, I don't know if we have a video. Well, if we could get one, I've tried to find some good ones, but I couldn't find any good ones. But it's really striking this type of behavior when you see the chimps do it, and it's really abnormal. It seems really abnormal.
Yeah, I mean, it's strange. They are obviously our closest biological, you know, relatives. But as you say, religion isn't something you'd really connect to anything that's not human, um, which is interesting coming from obviously a human point of view. When we think of God and we think of Jesus, we obviously think of them as we are created in their image. But what do you think would go through the mind of a chimp that's busy performing this action? Do you think it is um, reverie for a deity, or do you think it's more like when a boxer's manager slaps him in the face to get him like psyched up? Because I've seen another documentary about this, and they often do this before they go and hunt.
Yeah, that's what I
Really
was going to say as well. So, think about early hunter-gatherers. The men, before they went on a hunt, they probably did some sort of hunting ritual or something. Um, so that's a very interesting correlation between symbolic behavior in humans and symbolic behavior that we see in our closer relatives.
We've got a question in chat, which is, what's the difference between culture and religion? And I think that's an interesting question. Yeah, you were going to say?
Yeah, that is an interesting question. So, I think religion is more based on superstition, and culture is just the shared norms within a group of people. So, those shared norms could be superstitious or religious. So I'd say religion probably is some sort of subculture at the end of the day. Culture is more broader towards broader interactions between human beings.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's pretty much what I was also going to say. If you look at religion is obviously practiced by specific cultures. And these specific cultures obviously are more prone to worship a certain deity. So religion can be carried over by culture, as culture can be carried over by religion. As you see in a lot of our African cultures and African religions, a lot of their cultural customs stem from their religion, like religious circumcision. You see it in Jewish people as well. So it's a very interesting correlation. I think they kind of go hand in hand. Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's get back to the video. Oh, I was also going to say, we were mentioning early hunter gatherers. If you look at earlier like civilizations like the Greeks, they would always do a sacrifice to an appropriate god if they were going to go on a hunt. So the goddess of the hunt in the Greek mythology was obviously Artemis. So they would often sacrifice one of the animals that are associated with Artemis, like a stag. They would go out and hunt for a stag and then sacrifice it, and then the hunt would be a success. So yeah, it's interesting. When will this behavior be copied by our nearest relatives? And if that, has it not already been copied by our closest relatives? I can imagine like a very mob mentality vibe going on, that happens with human beings happening with apes as well. One person starts to sacrifice, like, I don't know, rabbit, and the rest of them start to freak out, like that episode on South Park with the critters, happy critters.
Yeah, or just, but I'm interested in how behavior like this would actually start. So some chimp must have thrown a rock into a hollow tree trunk and then done it again, and then more of them did it. But why? It's just it's such strange behavior to observe, and there's no clear reason for it, or well, that we can perceive at the end of the day. I'm pretty sure that the chimps have a good reason.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's like I pretty much said in the beginning of the video. There was probably at some point a time where there was no religion. So I think the same would be applicable to our jumpy friends. Anyway, let's get back to the video.
Cool.
Marks. The footage showed chimps behaving in strange ways. They placed certain shape or color stones in hollow trees. They also made gestures and movements which included throwing rocks at the trees. Biologists found rocks similar in size and color placed inside of the tree. In another study, 34 chimpanzee communities were sampled. 4 populations were found in West Africa where chimpanzees habitually bang and throw rocks against trees, or toss them into tree cavities, resulting in conspicuous stone accumulations at these sites. This represents the first record of repeated observations of individual chimpanzees exhibiting stone tool use for a purpose other than extractive foraging, at what appear to be targeted trees. Chimps would approach certain trees with a stone in their hand, or grabbing a stone from the base or from the inside of the tree's hollow cavities, and then proceed to throw it. The individuals observed in the camera trap footage were mainly adult males, but an adult female and a juvenile were also observed. Common to all cumulative stone throwing observations exhibited by adults was the pant hoot vocalization. The pant hoot is a characteristic feature of the ritualized agonistic displays of
This what they're saying about the children and the older chimpanzees doing the same thing, it's really akin to what happens in society with religion today. People obviously teach their children their religion, and it gets taught to their children. And at the end of the day, this is how these customs spread and how culture integrates with religion.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. So it's generally evolutionary beneficial for offspring to mimic the behavior of their parents. So offspring usually don't have the capacity to tell between behavior that is absolutely necessary and behavior that's not really necessary. So seeing this behavior from a very young age would probably establish it much more deeply than observing it later on and then adopting it.
Yeah. There's a question in chat. Could it be territorial markings? It's an interesting point to bring up. I mean, it can be something like how do you call it? Like a flag post type of vibe, where if you're part of the gang or you're part of the hunting pack or the hunting tribe, then you get to put your stone in the tree hollow to signify that you're now part of the team, as it were. So I think it's possible. I think reading into it as religion is already quite a far stretch of their imagination at the end of the day, because behavior doesn't necessarily equate to religion. But yeah.
I'm not quite sure because they said only 4 populations out of 34 displayed this behavior. So it's unlikely that other chimp populations would recognize this as a chimp marking of territory. Um, and
No,
I also
I
think
mean
that
less that. I
the
mean
actual
more
behavior.
in the group itself.
Okay, yeah,
In the group of
that's
apes, these specific apes mark themselves as special.
okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
what I mean.
All right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's possible. And I also think that when you look at the actual behavior, they make a lot of noise and they make a lot of eccentric movements and they jump against the trees and stuff. So um, if it was just territorial markings, I think the whole behavior of freaking out when you throw um, the rock into the tree is very symbolic, if I can put it that way. So maybe it is a way of marking your loyalty or something. I don't know. If you're a chimp.
Yeah. Well, okay, but let's keep going.
Of an adult male chimpanzee, which typically involves a bipedal stance, hand and feet drumming on the buttress roots of trees, and in some populations is preceded by a bizarre leaf clipping display. When the rock was thrown, this was often, but not always, accompanied by the climax phase of the pant hoot consisting of scream elements and drumming with the hands or feet on the tree. This newly discovered stone tool use behavior and stone accumulation sites in chimpanzees is reminiscent of human cairns. Stone piles are often used to mark natural cavities in the landscape for catching food, as well as paths and important places, and can hold a symbolic meaning for burials, ceremonial counting, and the establishment of shrines. It is hard to explain this behavior because, of course, we are not chimps, but creating such a structure that has no real purpose and is very odd. It does not provide protection, food, or seemingly any status in their community. To suggest a religious explanation would be quite a stretch. It seems to be more of a cultural or social expression. Regardless, this behavior is evidence of an understanding more complex than basic survival.
Do you maybe pause there?
Unusual behaviors have been observed in wild chimpanzees.
So this was just the last bit. He was saying that we kind of cannot really say it's religious because we don't know what's going on in Chim's mind. That's fine, but I also think if the behavior is sufficiently correlated to something like hunting or I don't think it's too far of a stretch to infer that the that the chimps feel like this behavior is needed before they go and hunt, even though it doesn't directly affect the hunt itself. And whether they understand that, we don't know. But yeah, maybe it's a psychological thing.
Well, it's a really interesting point to bring up. A story I like to refer to when talking about religion and the power thereof. Religion is a very powerful thing. When you look at the First Crusade, the Crusaders rode and they took back Acre and Damascus and they took back Jerusalem without much resistance. It was obviously war and there was resistance and fighting, but the Crusaders, being heavily out equipped in comparison to the defenders of these cities, had a bit of an easy time. when word was sent to Saladin, the general of the armies of the I'm not sure the armies of the infidels. Yeah, when word was sent to Saladin, he rode back with all of his horses. It said that he had around 100,000 troops strong, 100,000 horsemen, all with bows and so on and so forth. And what happened at Jerusalem is that the papacy that went along on the crusade told their crusaders that they had found the Holy Lance, the spear, obviously, that pierced Jesus' heart. And what resulted was such a religious fervor that the 10,000 crusaders also who were holding Jerusalem, instead of holding the walls and continuing with the siege and lasting in Jerusalem for quite a long time, decided to march um, out of the walls of Jerusalem and face the infidels head on. And history goes that they were in such a berserk religious fervor that the horsemen that were charging and the people that were trying to face up against this group of crusaders got so afraid they were stunned with fear. The horses turned and ran, and the men themselves retreated before the Crusader Knights. Now, obviously, history is reasonably embellished by the victor, but the point is that something that causes religious fervor can have such an impact on what you do, on something physical that you do, for example, like warfare, or just in general. It can send you into such a berserk state that you just outperform yourself, essentially.
Yeah, I agree. Cool.
Yeah, just keep going.
These in West Africa in the face of grass fires. The chimps did not panic or flee. Unusual behaviors have been observed in wild chimpanzees in West Africa in the face of grass fires. The chimps did not panic or flee. Instead, some made ritualistic displays that suggest they understand fire and do not fear it. This behavior has only been seen in the Fongoli chimpanzees. They live in a habitat that is mostly grassland, much different than the forest environment typical of most chimp populations. These populations are unique in many ways. They use caves, soak in pools of water, and hunt with tools. Fast-moving wildfires are common in their habitat towards the end of the long dry season. Anthropologist Dr. Jill Prutz witnessed the alpha male of a group perform a kind of ritualistic display towards the front of a raging wildfire. Dr. Prutz saw this behavior, including fire dancing, on 2 occasions in 2006, and said she was surprised at how well the chimps could predict the behavior of these fires. She said in one case that there was fire on 3 sides, and yet the chimps remained calm. She thought their calmness could represent a key stage in controlling fires, since it is necessary to overcome the fear before control becomes a possibility. The leader of the group, the alpha male, emitted a barking sound unlike the usual.
I think this is a good example of how we often underestimate the intelligence of chimps and other animals. And the researcher was obviously stunned because this fire was coming from 3 sides, and the chimps were they knew where to go, and they understood the fire really well. And that's more than we can say for some humans. So yeah, I think we often underestimate other animals' intelligence, and therefore we think they can't be religious. And I think we see other animals that can adapt their behavior very fast. And if you adapt to some sort of behavior, like standing in front of a fire and waving at it for some reason, and it helps you in some way, then you're probably going to keep on doing it.
Yeah, I mean, if you just look at it from an objective point of view, humans a few thousand years ago, say 2.5 or so thousand years ago, worshipped fire in a very similar way. I mean, we still worship fire in certain religions in a very similar way by dancing to it. Um, and it's an all too human trait when you really think about it. Why did ancient humans worship fire? Why did they worship the sun? Why did they worship the water? It's because they were things that they couldn't necessarily understand or explain. It's something we mentioned in the previous video on this channel. Something that you can't explain is all too easy to explain away by saying it's magic or it's divine intervention. It's the god of fire. So let's dance for the god of fire, and we'll be calm and know that the god of fire is going to protect us. And we know that the god of fire can sometimes change its mind when it works with the god of wind to blow the fire into your face. And it is just the easiest thing to explain it as being gods. So why wouldn't they see it in this way if 2,000 or so years ago we saw it in this way?
I think
it brings you back to the statement from Charles Darwin, what you told me a while back, where what we will see when the world ends, what will be on Earth when it dies, or in a few 2,000, 1 million years, whatever, will be so far away from us as we were from the first life forms that were made on Earth. So obviously apes are still evolving. Their social structure is still evolving. Their social pressures are still evolving, and they're evolving with them. And with that can obviously start to come a higher understanding. And as we see creatures with higher understanding start to want to explain things, but when they can't, they attribute it to a deity.
I think it's also well established that we as humans assume agency behind things that are sometimes random. So we assume there's some agent behind the wind or some agent behind fire, and that's why we assign a god to it. And yeah, I think we how can I put it? I lost my words. But yeah, it's all about thinking that there's some agent in, or some essence in these things.
Yeah. Okay, so let's keep going.
Usual warning calls, and then dance in a similar way to the rain dances noted by primatologist Jane Goodall, in which the chimps swayed in a slow motion as thunderstorms approached. Male chimps elsewhere have been seen displaying in this way, in a slow motion dance to show their dominance. The fire dance was a similar exaggerated dance, but directed towards the approaching blaze. Dr. Prutz is convinced the chimps can conceptualize fire, and it is known that captive apes can even control fire. She said that if chimpanzees can understand fire, the ape-like small-brained ancestors of humans who lived in similar habitats around 5 million years ago could have done the same. Perhaps we are seeing a key stage in human evolution in which we too understood fire. Our theories around human evolution involve primitive chimp-like apes adapting to a savanna environment. Our ancestors would have certainly come across wildfires and may have performed similar behaviors. Perhaps it was an evolutionary advantage to perform symbolic behavior, and more importantly, believing in the power of these strange rituals. It seems humans are hardwired to believe in something more, something we can't see or explain. This may be why religions have been so fundamental to the human species. On an unrelated note, another thing I found interesting is that the Fungoli chimpanzees are not afraid of humans in the same way most are. This is because the people in Senegal do not eat them and consider them to be close relatives. How cool is it that these people recognize our close relations with these animals? Something that many still don't believe around the world today. I think a lot of us Westerners and people who don't generally live around apes like this really have no concept of how similar we are to these animals. In the book, The Power of Faith, Mother Nature's Gift, the author J.D. Glass investigates the origins of religion and how it might have helped us through the chaotic world that nurtured our ancestors. In a video that I will link below, he discussed how chimpanzees are subservient to their alpha male. The other chimpanzees show their submission by kneeling in front of their leader, just as many religions do today. Kneeling is a universal sign among animals and humans of submission. The chimps look to their dominant male for protection and always trust his intuition. In the face of a thunderstorm, the subservient chimps cower in fear. However, the alpha male fears no evil.
The subservient chimps cower, but their leader responds to the threatening sounds of thunder and lightning by giving his own threat display back. Racing around, banging tree limbs, throwing rocks. "You can't intimidate me," he says. "I'm in charge here. Take that."
In the face of a storm, he begins a threat display,
Did you pause?
running about,
So that just made me think of the story of Jesus entering the market and turning over all the tables.
I don't know what story you're referring to.
In the Bible, at some stage, Jesus went into the market place where all the business was conducted and people had to pay taxes and stuff. And he turned over all the tables. And apparently it was about how corrupt the system was and stuff. He was a real socialist.
Cool. Okay. Well, yeah. What it makes me think of is my dog's at home. It's I think a very natural behavior for subservient and beta animals to cower and look to their alpha for protection. So when there's lightning, my alpha dog doesn't really worry about it. He's not stressed at all. Whereas the rest of them, they start to get uncomfortable and cry and come to me for attention and for reassurance. And it's because obviously I'm their alpha. So it's a really interesting observation in the wild, where you would assume that an animal is reasonably used to lightning and thunder and the like, them still cowering in fear and looking to the alpha for reassurance.
But yeah, well, do you think animals know what lightning is? Because it's pretty scary if you don't know what it is.
I don't think they necessarily know what it is. I think that they think that it is probably, if we talk about the chimps, attributed to some deity. It's possible that they think this. It's what we thought not too long ago as well. Lightning is a deity. That was the explanation. We know now that it's a lot of static friction in the atmosphere caused by wind and water molecules rubbing together, and then it forms discharge. So we can explain it, but obviously an animal can't. They think it's a very loud noise. They see it's a very bright light. And these two things in nature generally tend to mean stay away. Big bright light equals fire. Big loud noise equals big loud
free
thing.
falling or big loud thing.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's very natural to be afraid of something you can't understand that's really loud and bright.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Mashing trees with rocks. To the other chimps, their leader's bravery reinforces to them that he is the protector, their leader. This behavior is similar to the aforementioned displays in the face of fire. It is easy to see that this behavior is the precursor to not only human hierarchies, but also to religion. To those other apes, the alpha seems to have connections with natural forces, just as religious figures claim to have a connection with the unseen. Some of the first known gods that humans created are elemental gods. Think of Zeus, the god of thunder, or Poseidon, the god of the sea. The first religions were likely just worshipping their leader or these powerful natural forces.
I think another interesting comparison, as he says, can be made to the big gods in the majority of cultures. If you look at the mythological cultures as they were, like the Egyptians and the Norse and the Greek and the Romans, they all had very important gods assigned to very unexplainable, inexplicable things, like the ocean, because the ocean is enormous, water in itself. How do you explain it? If you don't know what it is, you can obviously figure out the properties. It makes you wet, wood floats on it, etc. But how do you explain where it comes from? So they attribute a very important god to be in control of the oceans because it's such a important and big thing. Similarly, something that is so awe-inspiring, like lightning and thunder, also get their own very important gods assigned to them, like Zeus and like Thor. Similar with the sun, and similar with things like death. It's these really big, very sort of in-your-face phenomena that have the really big, important gods assigned to them, and that's again a really interesting thing. It just goes to show that, like, the more something is inexplicable, the more almost divine it can seem.
Yeah, I agree.
It's like wherever there's a volcano, people worship the volcano, or they used to at least.
Yeah,
Because you don't know what the hell the volcano is, but it randomly erupts, and
most like polytheistic religions also have a deity for the sun and for
the moon.
For the moon and such. Some are, so it's we see some recurring themes across religions.
An interesting theme that is also reasonably recurring in mythology is a god of war. The god of war is present in a lot of different cultures, or a god that's at least associated more with war than the rest, which again is very indicative of the human condition. We've been warring since we've been humans.
Since when?
War is so ingrained into humanity that it is hard to imagine a world without war, because I don't think there ever has been one.
Yeah, it's almost constantly been war.
Pretty much.
And I think it could be one of the defining features of humanity is the fact that not just that we do war, we constantly do war.
And we're good at it.
Yeah. Well, some of our best discoveries, some of our greatest achievements are done through war. So that's it's a bit of a catch-22.
A little bit, yeah. Anyway, let's keep going.
It seems it is ingrained in humans to trust charismatic leaders, even if that means adopting really odd beliefs. Just look at the Manson family, Branch Davidians, or the People's Temple. These cults were able to trick a lot of people into really bizarre beliefs, and eventually led to a lot of tragedy. Are these cult leaders much different than the alpha chimp? Both of them convince their subordinates that they are divine and deserve the right to rule. As mentioned at the beginning of the video, religion seems to be pretty fundamental to human nature. Though atheism is increasing, religion is still very prominent, and this may never change. This video is not supposed to advocate for atheism, but if you accept human evolution, you probably would also accept that there was a time before humans had invented any gods. a time when our ancestors were quadrupedal beasts who threw rocks at trees. God seems to be essential to our emotional well-being, and in our earliest days played a role in survival and perpetuation of our species. Faith may be as natural and necessary a human relationship, and as genetically preordained as is a mother's bond with her child. In times of hardship, we can look up to the supernatural for protection, a force that is always there and always loves us. This is basically the concept of Jesus. Even atheists cannot deny the importance of religion in our culture. Whether it be
Could you
through
pause?
placebo or a real deity, worshippers.
So I think this is the part where I say that religious people are a bit needy. They like need to know there's someone watching over them, and they need to know that it's not going to end and they're going to heaven. They need to believe that life is not just a suffering and then it ends.
Yeah, I think it's a good reason, or it's a reason why a lot of people are religious, but I don't think it's intrinsically the meaning of religion. I don't think I don't think at least you should be a Christian to go to heaven or to avoid going to hell. I think it should be thought of as more like a perk, where you're given an example of a way to live, and if you do that, then here's your reward. But I don't think that you're supposed to live to try and get into heaven. At least I don't think so. Yeah.
Okay. I'd agree with you, but I
That makes
just
sense, right?
think
That's a
I
strange
just
thing to think about. That
I
you
think
are in a religion
yeah,
that you're trying to get to heaven, but it shouldn't really be the point, and it isn't really the point of the religion that you're gonna
yeah,
get to heaven. It's not like this big race. Let's get to heaven.
yes.
Yeah.
You need to be good out of your own will,
Yes.
and
Not because you think someone's
yeah, heaven is just a happy byproduct of it. But I don't think that's why people are religious. I think they're scared of hell and they want to believe it's gonna be a happy ending.
I suppose it depends from person to person at the end of the day.
Mm.
What their reason is for their belief or non-belief.
Yeah,
Um,
it's
but that's
probably
what
not
makes
gonna be the
religion,
same for everyone.
yeah, that's what makes religion such a magical thing. It's very individual. Yes,
Mm.
it can have very mobby traits, and it can have very you're my neighbor, so I'm going to do the same thing type of vibe. But at the end of the day, and at least in Western civilization, you're allowed to choose. You can do what you want. So I think it's a very personal choice.
Mm.
So we've got Prosim in the chat saying the point is not to get to heaven, but to utilize the gift of life. And that's such a
I,
good point.
I
Carpe
I
diem.
I agree with that. Yeah. But um, utilizing the gift of life is not generally going to get you into heaven, and I think that's where most religious people want to go. If you take away heaven, I think they're not going to be like good people anymore. But I do agree. I think
I think I also agree with you to a very certain extent, because if you take away the prize of heaven, I do think that a lot of people wouldn't be as religious. I think it would be less of a widespread thing if there isn't the goal at the end. It's a really good point, and you often
or
see
even if
it's a common thing to hear where your neighbor tells your other neighbor in neighborly gossip, yeah, no, that person goes to church, and the moment they walk out the door, it's back to being a sinner. Um, yeah, yeah, I think you get that.
yeah, yeah, and I also think if when people don't believe in how, they also become less religious.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's a really, I don't know how to put it. If you also look at a lot of the mythological religions, there are different motivations for doing different things in life. So if you look at the Norse religion, you've got where if you die a warrior's death, you're going to go to Valhalla. Whereas if you die a shameful death, you'll go to hell. You've got the Greek idea where if you've lived a good life and you are rich enough, then you go to the fields of asphodel. If you've lived an ordinary life and you haven't done much with your life, you've just lived your life, you get to go to you get to go to the fields of asphodel. Where they go when they live a good life is Elysium. Elysium. Yeah. And if you've been a prick your whole life, then you get to go to Tartarus. So a common theme with popular religions is reward versus punishment. And it's always a great way to convince people to do anything. You look at it through the religious point of view of different cultures as well. The only one I really can think of that doesn't work on punishment is Buddhism, because the punishment in Buddhism is being on
Is
earth.
now, yeah, life.
Yeah.
We are currently in hell, and
Yeah.
you want to reach nirvana. So
Yeah.
and the only way to do that is to renounce all
And
everything.
interestingly, although it's popular, it's less popular than a lot of the more mainstream religions. And it could be because there's no um, no punishment involved. I don't know. It's really reasonably possible.
It's only effective if someone really buys into uh, to self-discipline, stuff like that. So
Yeah.
it's harder to buy into because it's not as easy.
Yeah.
It's not that easy of a religion because there's no pressure to not do bad things because you won't be punished.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Let's finish
that's
up this video.
Stephen in the chat saying a way to control the masses. I think that is one of the major things when civilizations started, or when larger groups of humans conglomerated. There was a need to control people because men especially want to assert dominance. So all the men would probably try to climb this ladder of dominance, and it wouldn't work out. So they needed some sort of way to generally control the behavior of a large group of people.
Manifest destiny, right?
Mm.
Yeah. No, I think it's very similar to what we explained in also our previous video on this channel. Is on the Sumerian mythology. Is that a religion is a very good way also to communicate good lessons to people. So the comparison we drew was to the Nile River's floods and the Egyptian populace gaining a new goddess that was in charge of the flood of the Nile, so that the people could learn to use the perennial flooding to harvest better crops. So who better
There's
to
knowledge packed
pass
in
this
there.
message on than your local priest? And the higher priest tells this to the local priests when they convene, and the local priests tell it to the local populace. So the local populace has now picked up a new god and a new form of worship, but with it, they've gained a new skill and they've learned something out of the religion that has led them forward, and thus they venerate what they have learned as it being a god.
That's a pretty big theme currently, I think, in like very progressive Christianity, like having this whole psychological interpretation of the Bible, and looking at the mythical stories as evolutionary knowledge passed down through the ages and stuff like that. So it's a theme that we're seeing currently at the moment as well.
Yeah. Okay, let's finish up our video. Let's see.
Deny the importance of religion in our culture. Whether it be through placebo or a real deity, worshippers are put at ease by the thought of an all-knowing power looking over them. The study of religion and the human psyche is fascinating. It is a large part of what makes us human. Thanks for watching. Did you guys like this video? I tried to mix anthropology and philosophy together.
Okay, yeah, that was the end. There's Stephen in the chat saying, yeah, plus a deity carries more authority than a local magistrate or leader, and that he agrees. It's probably why there were so many different religious leaders in old religions, and why they held such stature within society. They were very respected. Often your shaman or your mage or magi or whatever would have as much, if not more, authority than your magistrate or your mayor. Yeah, punt in the wind.
Punt an event.
Punt an event.
but I also think a very useful way that deities are used to control behavior is you cannot always have evidence to, in a legal system, prosecute someone. And religion is a way of saying, listen, we can't always see you, but someone's always watching you. There's always someone, an invisible eye in the sky watching. And so you might get away with it in this life, but in the next life, you're going to suffer for it.
I also hear it often as a very reassuring factor from different people, like, oh, that guy's going to burn in hell because he did something bad. When that is technically the very opposite of the mentality that you should have as a Christian. You should you should obviously try to help him. You should try to show him the right way. You should try to show him the gospel, and you should try to convert him. But instead, the answer is, nah, ooh, that guy's going to go to hell. And that's such a vengeful sort of point of view.
And it's judgmental. It's extremely judgmental.
I mean, obviously, you want to say and you want to feel that someone like Jeffrey Dahmer, someone who has killed tons of people, someone who has done atrocious, monstrous things, goes to hell. I think that's a very natural human feeling. You want to feel that there is some punishment for this guy because of the horrible shit that he's done. So I think it's very easy to empathize with this point of view, but I also think it goes a little bit far sometimes.
Yeah. What is it? I think Christianity started off as a very like a socialist type of religion. I have no other word for it, but it was take care of the weak, and you should take money from the rich and give it to the poor and stuff like that. So I don't know what my point was there. I forgot.
In the chat, but I think that's also pointed at the dysfunctional, not those of sound mind, to control the outliers of society. I think this is referring to the invisible eye in the sky thing that you were mentioning. I mean, yes, at the end of the day, but when you have outliers in society, or previously, like historically in society, when you had outcasts and outliers, they often didn't necessarily agree with the system, and thus they were shunned. It's a lot like what's happening in Iran right now. The women who don't want to cover their hair are being killed en masse, and they are being shunned by society and by the ruling party because they are now technically outliers. But the idea of the invisible eye in the sky that's going to punish them because they are not covering their hair isn't enough of a convincing factor to make them want to give up all of their rights and human rights and etc.
Well, the Muslims are not waiting for them. They're sending them to that punishment early. They're like,
Yeah.
we're gonna get you as well.
Yeah.
But I also think onto the comments. I think like Diogenes.
Diogenes,
Diogenes, maybe, yeah. But I think it's also not just about the outliers,
Diogenes
because
is, sorry, man. Diogenes is a Greek philosopher. One of the founders of Cynic philosophy.
all
Yeah.
right.
He was born in Sinope, an Ionian colony on the Black Sea, 400 BC, and died in Corinth. So he's a Greek. Yeah, that's around the time of the Greeks.
Cool.
Yeah.
I wish I knew philosophy better.
Diogenes the Cynic. Yes, I'm sure I've heard of Diogenes the Cynic. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. But I think that is all we have time for today. We're approaching about an hour. We can't really start up the next video. But yeah, I think we'll cover it next time. John, final thoughts?
I think we get a better understanding of how we became humans when we look at our relatives. And for a very long time, we thought we were special because of our religious views. But I think once we get to know other animals and we study them more, we realize that we are much more closely related to them than we originally think.
Yeah. So for my final thoughts, good show, guys, in the comments. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Jam, thanks for tuning in, man. So for my final thought, I think that what we're seeing here is almost like a glimpse into our past. What we're seeing is the development of a very close genetic neighbor that is essentially finding his feet or its feet. It's learning these new things that we learned thousands and millions of years ago, and we are taking but a small. We're seeing a small picture of the evolution, and that's a really special thing. We're seeing that these animals are starting to adopt similar characteristics to us more and more, and that's a really special thing where we're literally seeing this animal, our closest relative, evolve alongside us, and that's really cool.
I agree. Cool. Well, on that note, goodbye, and if you liked it, please like and please subscribe.
Yeah, thanks guys. Cheers.